At first, I was like, Cold War as a joke, but bro, I don't think it's a joke anymore. Hey rats, and welcome back to another video on my sewer. And today, I know it's been a while since I uploaded a video, but that's because lately I was being tortured by the IB. So far, I believe I'm doing acceptable. Now, I just need to go through history and English, and that will be it for the exams. So it's 10 p.m. I usually go to bed by 9 probably, but I will like stay up all night studying because I still have more topics to study. But one of the most important things that will come in tomorrow's exam is the Cold War. And I basically squished 2 years of Cold War in a week. And I've been joking around in my socials that I'll be doing a video playing Dress to Impress while also explaining the Cold War. And I was not joking. Like, genuinely, I believe that teaching must be one of the most effective methods to get stuff in your head. So I think I will try to explain to y'all what I understood from, you know, the resumes that I've done, this ginormous book that I'm reading. I'm sick and tired of life, but at least I believe I understand the Cold War now, so I'm just gonna share my knowledge with y'all. This video is gonna be posted after the exams, so it will not be helpful for this year's exams, but maybe for next year, I'm sorry. I have to put me first. I'll play Dress to Impress later. So basically, I'm doing all of this not because I'm not getting the diploma, because even if I fail this course, I'm still getting the diploma, because I did very well on other stuff. But for the university, apparently I can do a convalidation of courses if I get 5 at least out of 7. So my goal is to get 5, and I will let y'all know if I got to that goal. So yeah, I'm gonna show my grade to my teacher because I'm convinced that he hates me. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy the Cold War in Dress to Impress. Before starting, I just have to clarify that all of this is based on data. Like, there's no subjective opinions of mine on this. This is like history, but shown as a gossip. I literally made all of the leaders have secret love affairs with each other. That's how delusional I am. Also, be sure to comment how many times do I say basically in this video, because I feel that it's gonna be a lot of times. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's start. Started in 1945 and ended in 1991. It was basically called the Cold War because there was no direct fighting between the big two world powers. The Second World War creates the conditions for this conflict, and after this, Europe is totally destroyed, and after that, there are two world powers that become recurrent on all this story. It is the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. Y'all, I cannot take me seriously while doing this, I'm sorry. So basically, after World War II, there is this need of putting order and having more power. And there are two main visions that originate from this, and it is a war between capitalism and communism, the North American vision and the Soviet vision. I have this sort of organizer that divides the Cold War in 4 stages, and it has like the main events and all of that, but we really need to understand what each of these events mean, and they are a lot. I'll make sure to mention which stage we are on before starting all of the events. So, 1945. This is where it all starts with the containment. There is this conference that is called the Yalta Conference that basically world powers decided how to finish with the war and decide the new order of the world. Nobody trusted anybody, and it was basically a war between capitalism and communism. So basically, they had to liberate the countries that were under the control of Germany, and the leader of the USSR, called Stalin, did not want those countries to become anti-Soviet, and the United States thought that all of this was a conspiration to expand communism, which some historians think it was, but not necessarily. So Europe became divided in 2 blocks, communist and capitalist, after this conference. And Germany also got divided, but it was in 4 regions. One belonged to the United Kingdom, one to France, one to the USSR, and one to the United States. And then Berlin, the capital of Germany, was also divided in 2 zones, the Western and the Eastern Zone. And these two blocks were divided by this imaginary line that was called the Steel Curtain, and basically just separated the countries, that's it. So, United States wanted to be everywhere, and they wanted to get in every war just so they could stop communism. And because of this, there is this doctrine called the Truman Doctrine that is created by the President Truman, and basically its only purpose is to say no to communism, to avoid expansion, and it was just done to prevent an emptiness in power. This was the first important expression of the containment in the Cold War. But a doctrine is just a teaching, it's not a plan, so nothing much changes after that. But as a response to the Truman Doctrine, the USSR creates the Zhdanov Doctrine, which is basically the same but communist. And it states that the world is divided in two blocks: the imperialism, led by the United States, and the democrat, which is led by the USSR. So with these two doctrines, they go into many proxy wars. And a proxy war is basically when they give money and resources to other countries so they could fight between each other without really involving either the United States or the Soviet Union. And to make all of this work, there's this plan that is created from the Truman Doctrine, and basically it is the United States giving money to countries, and it had the purpose of building and reactivating economy in Europe so it stables itself and it can avoid the expansion of communism. But as a response to this, from the USSR, they create the Plan Molotov in 1948, which is the same to avoid capitalism. After that, they also try to reunificate Germany, but they didn't reach any agreement. So the United States, France, and the United Kingdom decided to be together and join their parts of Germany. So there was a division of two regions of Germany. As a response to this, the USSR decided to do a block in Western Berlin, because even though they joined, Berlin was still inside of the Soviet region, so they made a block between those two regions through land. Basically no cars, no nothing. But the countries were smart and decided to use this strategy called the air bridge, where basically there would be planes that would go over Western Berlin so they could get resources such as food or toys and a lot of stuff. Well, not a lot, but like what they need. Evidently, that was successful because the blocking was ended in 1949. After this little United States winning, there was a creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which was like a military alliance in response to the Soviet pressure. And it had two main objectives. Defend each other and stop Soviet expansionism. As a response to that, the USSR creates the Warsaw Pact, which again is the same but communist. So after this, there is this arms race, basically like weapons, because both countries were creating weapons, and they were basically trying to prove to each other that they were better through nuclear weapons, like atomic bombs and all of that. So while all of that was happening, now the focus of this last part of the containment is Asia, after the world leader Mao Zedong wins in China. So after that, he creates the People's Republic of China, which basically had a communist base. And for the United States, China becomes like a puppet of the USSR. And communism now controls mostly everything of Asia because China is one of the countries that has one of the biggest geographic extensions. And that leads to Mao signing an alliance with the USSR, which was in charge of Stalin at this point. So from China, we go to Korea now. The War of Korea is when North Korea invades South Korea, because it was also separated into blocks. South Korea was being held by the United States, and North Korea was evidently being helped by the USSR. So they helped each other, and the President Truman from the United States responds, sending troops so they can stop the pro-Soviet advance. Then China shows support to North Korea and they attack after that. But at the end, the United States, China, and North Korea signed a deal where basically they just stop fighting. But South Korea did not sign this deal. So basically this is like a war that is still waiting. But South Korea did not sign this deal and they basically just made the war stop. It is like a paused war. And with the Korean War, that's how we finish the first stage of the Cold War, which is the containment. The second stage is called Pacific Coexistence, and it starts in 1953 when Stalin died, and then a new leader for the USSR takes place, and that iconic leader is called Nikita Khrushchev. You know, the same basically. And just he did not like Stalin at all. So he made a secret discourse so he can be very clear about that. And he started this period of de-Stalinization. Wait, I don't think that's how you say it. It is, yeah, de-Stalinization. Same stuff. So Khrushchev believed in pacific coexistence, and he freed a lot of people from the gulags, which were basically work camps to torture people. And he also allowed art, and not only Soviet realism, which was the only allowed type of art. He was more of a liberal, but the USSR already had some deals with other people, including China, and the world leader Mao of China did not like what Khrushchev was doing. So he said, you know what? It's not me, it's you. We're breaking up. And they basically started having fights of propaganda about who is a better communist. You see, you have to associate them as if that was like real gossip, you know? If I have to explain it in pop terms, I would have to say it's Nicki and Cardi, but just for this stage. I will not be generalizing, none of that, because I have no idea about anything. I just want a good grade. So while all of that was happening on the Communist Party, United States was having a change of president. It went from Truman to Eisenhower, and he implemented this new doctrine that was known as the Massive Retaliation Doctrine. And it basically came up with the possibility of answering with nuclear weapons against the USSR or China. And it wanted to discourage the communists from supporting other countries or promoting wars within them to avoid communism. But Eisenhower also said that they should be making more nuclear technology because of the Korean War, just because they wanted to be more prepared and prove that they have more power. And with this wanting to prove that they had more power, in 1955, they started with space technology, and this thing called space race started, which is basically a very childish war between the USSR and the United States of, yeah, I'm better because I get to the space first. And all of that will develop later in this story, but this is what was happening right now. And while the United States was busy building rockets and all of that, in the USSR, in Germany specifically, people were escaping Eastern Berlin to go to Western Berlin to have a better quality of life because of the current conditions of each of those. And Mr. Nicky did not like that, so he decided to build a wall, which was known as the Berlin Wall, so nobody could get in or out of Eastern Berlin. And then this is another important part of this story because it's the first time United States loses against the USSR, and that was in Cuba. And Cuba's situation is that they were in a military dictatorship, and the United States was very fond of this government, and they gave monetary help to Cuba, but the citizens were still very poor, so that was not fair. And then there was this thing called the Cuban Revolution, which was led by Fidel Castro and Raúl Castro, which was his brother. And there was this first revolution that was a complete fail against the government, helped by the United States. But then there was a second revolution with this new character called Che Guevara, and this one was a success, so he randomly became famous. And then Cuba became exactly the same, but communist. There was still a military dictatorship, but it was communist, and the USSR was very fond of that, so now it was the same, but they had like monetary support from the USSR. And then the United States tried to do a rebellion against this government, but it was a fail. And that's how the second block ends, because now we're starting to get to the most important part of the Cold War, because this was the sole moment that there was so much tension that they believed that they could be a World War III. And that was when John Kennedy became the president of the United States, and there was this period of time where the USSR and the United States had a very close eye on each other. They were literally spying each other on so many ways. There were recordings on the United States Embassy. So this third block of the Cold War is known as the distension, and I know it because It's like, wait, hold on. Because the United States discovered that the USSR was having missiles inside of Cuba that were pointing directly to the United States, which was basically, we are going to attack you. But the United States also had missiles in Turkey that were aiming directly at the USSR. So as a way to force the communists to take off the missiles, Kennedy sent ships to Cuba to apply pressure to the USSR and they take off the missiles. But they did not because they were playing hard to get. That's why I believe that John Kennedy and That's why John Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were lovers. So basically, Nikita sent submarines to Cuba with nuclear weapons. This was the sole moment that had the most tension in all of the Cold War. This is definitely coming in the exam tomorrow. So all of this is known as the missiles crisis. This is very crucial to understand. But at the end, they both removed the missiles from Turkey and Cuba with the only condition that the United States should not be invading Cuba again. Well, not again, it never happened, but like not trying to. And then there was this new policy that was called the red telephone, which was actually not a telephone nor red, but red symbolizes like a crisis state. So it was a direct line between Washington and Moscow. So the United States and the USSR could solve their problems like a happy couple, because that's why they should be. And after that, Kennedy was shot. There are many theories on why, but there's no clear answering on who did it. Well, who he was working for, because they know who did it. But as a replacement to Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson becomes the new president of the United States. And in the USSR, the icon Nicki Minaj steps down from being the leader of the USSR. And that's when Leonid Brezhnev dismisses Khrushchev as the Soviet leader, and he said to himself that he wanted to do things better than Nikita. But no, you're never gonna be as iconic as Nikki. So you know what he did? He restricted art, music, literature, and everything. He was not as liberal at all. As an example, there was this leader in Czechoslovakia who gave the citizens a couple of freedom, so Brezhnev decided to invade them to stop that from happening. And that was known as the Prague Spring. And then the Vietnam War starts. It was also divided into South and North. And North wanted to get to communism, but South did not. So helped by the respective world powers, United States was doing super bad, and that led to South losing. And that United States president, nobody wanted him, because he was sending young people to the war in Vietnam when they wanted their normal lives, as normal teenagers. So he did not die, but he quitted. He had enough. And that's where Richard Nixon becomes the president of the United States. And that's when the first man in the moon thing happens. Even though the USSR had many more achievements, they were completely overshadowed by the propaganda that the first man in the moon had for the United States. That was solely because of this space race. But besides that, they signed this treaty called Nuclear Non-Proliferation, and it basically forbid every country to have nuclear arms, except of course from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the USSR, and China. And after that, there had been these treaties called SALT, like the thing that you put on your food, SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Talk. There were two of these. The first one was in 1972, and it was signed by Nixon and Brezhnev, and it was a limit for missiles, and it also helped to reduce the tension about the nuclear thing. And then enters Jimmy Carter, who was responsible for signing the second SALT treaty. It was signed by Jimmy Carter and Brezhnev, and it was basically a limitation of the total of nuclear forces that you could have. After that, Ronald Reagan becomes the president of the United States. He was not as specific as the other ones, and he was really clear about being the enemy of the USSR. And with the SALT treaties, we have the end of the third block of the Cold War, and for the fourth one, it is called the Second Cold War. Y'all, I'm sick and tired. I just want to sleep. No, I have to study Stalin after this. So, 1979, Afghanistan invasion. The Popular Democratic Party in Afghanistan did a revolution, and they got to the power, and they established a communist base base. Therefore, the USSR got in Afghanistan so they could support this government because they were facing a lot of resistance from the opposition. And all of this led to a very prolonged war. And that's how the Second Cold War starts. But that's also how the USSR starts to see a downfall. The rise and fall of the Soviet princess stopped that. So, in 1982, Brezhnev dies, and then Andropov becomes the new leader, but he also dies. And then Chernenko becomes the new leader, but he also dies. And then Chapel Roan becomes the new leader. The Soviet princess, Mikhail Gorbachev, becomes the new leader of the USSR. And he implements these two new politics called Perestroika and Glasnost. Perestroika means restructuration, and Glasnost is like opening. It was basically restructuration of economy and opening, as in having more freedom of politics and expression. He was extremely chill about that. So with these two new politics, those countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact became independent from the USSR, and Gorbachev did not do anything about that. But his purpose was not to destroy the USSR. And another doctrine that was implemented also by Gorbachev was the Sinatra doctrine. And yeah, Sinatra as in Frank Sinatra as in the My Way guy. And it is literally inspired by the song My Way. And it allowed the countries from the Warsaw Pact to resolve their inner conflicts their way. That's why it is called Sinatra doctrine. But this sole doctrine just led to the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. And as you can tell, there has been a downfall in the USSR, enormous downfall. And then a press conference in 1989, I remember that because, 1989, led Western Berlin police to allow citizens to go to Eastern Berlin, and progressively the Berlin Wall started to fall. And the first sign that the Cold War has ended and the USSR is not a thing anymore. But it was not until 1990 that Germany went back together as just one whole and not anymore as two blocks or Berlin being separated from everything in 4 blocks. No, it was just Germany. And then in 1991, Chapel Roan quits as president and the USSR dissolves. And that's it. That's the end of the Cold War. That was a whole dang hour of talking. Now, how much of that will come on tomorrow's exam? Absolutely nothing. I should be studying Stalin and Mao. And it's also true that most of these are perspectives and nothing is certain about history. So what am I doing with my life? I absolutely have no idea. Sick and tired of this. But I won my 5 in history. I want my history teacher to look at me and be like, who is this diva? But yeah, I was also gonna do a video about Stalin and Mao, but it is tomorrow and it is 12 p.m. So yeah, that's not happening. But to upload this video, I will be playing Dress to Impress after the exams. I will let you know how these go, but I did like a very pessimist prediction of what my grades will be on each of these history exams. And hear me out, it is not impossible to get a 5. Of course, the more the better, but all I want is to convalidate courses. So yeah, I hope this video has helped me somehow, and I hope that Dress to Impress while listening to the history of the Cold War was somehow pleasant to you guys in any way. I don't know how it could be, but yeah, I want to jump off a cliff. Thank you so much for watching this video up until this point. I know it's gonna be very long. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, stay safe, stay tuned, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, love you. Mwah.